Archive 81, the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, and Iki. This is Staying In.
So, what do you think of the new haircut?
The new haircut.
Is it new?
You see it, yeah, today.
I like that.
So, was this Tony, or is this someone else?
No, this is Tony. This is the walk-in barbers in the village.
Okay.
Is it exclusively run by Russian military?
Yeah. Or ex-KGB.
Kris, this is important. I want you to imagine.
Yeah.
One of my social anxieties is when they ask me what I want, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
So when you sat down in that chair and they said,
Yeah.
So, what are you having? You replied,
I produce my smartphone and say, that please. And I point to a picture on there and I say, 0 back and sides, and it will need finning on the top. Because otherwise there's just no point in me having a haircut.
So who's a picture of?
Yeah, who's the picture
I
of?
don't know, I just Googled.
Is it him? It's basically, it's Kris,
just him
isn't it?
again. The
This is
same
what he did
thing,
last time.
please. Yeah.
It's yeah. This again, please. I'll have another. No, it's just basically a generic kind of like haircut, men's haircut. What do they call it? A high top? What's the style called where you have it?
A high top.
Is it called a high top? I don't know. This is why in an era without smartphones, without photographs, I can't imagine what it would be like. Because when I was a kid, I used to just walk in. It was just free back and side, scissors on the top. But that's all I would say as a teenager. That was like the degree of my
No small
knowledge.
talk. No, where are you going on holidays? Just
I mean, as a teenager, like I was, in the throes of puberty, so my voice all over the place. So, it was very, very laconic, really. But one thing I noticed today, as I kind of, as you have to kind of move your head up and down and left and right as it's getting cut and trimmed in all this manner, I tell you what, lads, there's a lot of grey in my hair. A lot.
There is a lot of grey in your hair.
So when beforehand, when they're kind of doing the finning and you get this like little kind of confetti, that used to be very brown, but now it's just white. Just like snow, basically.
it does look like you're sort of like cosplaying as Rogue from the X-Men.
Yeah.
You got a good cowlick going on. I know it's not a cowlick. What is it called? It's the they named a TV series after it, or it's named after a TV series that was on ITV in like the late 80s.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay.
It's called like
Going for gold?
Some mothers do have them.
It ain't half hot, Mum?
The Good Life.
It's a Mallen Streak. The Mallen Streak.
A Mallen
That was it.
Streak.
Oh, what a Mallen Streak.
The Mallen Streak.
And there was a TV show named after this.
I think the TV show was just called The Mallens. But when you have a grey bit in your hair, it's known as a Mallen Streak.
Oh my gosh! I mean, this is more than a streak right now. Do you reckon you'll ever dye your hair? You know, if the grey comes through more pronounced, do you reckon you'll ever do that?
No. Commit to the bit.
Well, clearly I have. It's a bit too late for me, but it's not too late for you two.
When I get into like proper old age, I'm going to dye my hair every colour under the sun that I can possibly dye it.
All at once.
All at once. Rainbow hair colour. I think that'd be really cool.
Wow.
Actually, by then we'll probably have like, your hair will probably be,
Fibre optics.
Yeah, exactly. You could put fibre optics in, hook yourself up to Winamp, and then suddenly, you're the life of the party.
As you all know, we're planning in this household for the arrival of the next Horizon game, which at time of release is out in 3 days. Actually, Pete, it's coming out the weekend that you come up to visit. Touchwood.
Ooh, that's exciting.
So, guess what we're doing?
Going shopping. That sounds good. Are we excited for that?
I'm very excited.
I'm pretty excited. I've watched a 2-hour-long video on YouTube to remind myself actually what happened in the first one and all the lore before and after that game happened.
Right.
Because I did not spend enough time in that world. I really enjoyed I absolutely loved the first one, but I did not really pick up on the nuances of that world.
Do you know how I realised I'd played too much of Horizon Zero Dawn?
When it was Sunset?
Well, when I described a car once, I just described a car and I described, look, that's got alloys. Genuinely, that happened. And they're like, you what? Alloys, sorry. Like, I'd sunk so many hours into that, because for me, open world games, if I subscribe to the theme and the lore, it just sucks me in, and I just want to just immerse myself in it fully, really. And I just lived and breathed that game for hours and hours on end, really. For like about half a year I spent in that world. Yeah, and it is worth it. It does, it does reward you for doing that.
It's very good. Definitely some of the most satisfying combat in an open world game.
It's such an odd concept for me, that studio, right? So Guerrilla, is the team that put that thing together. And the thing that I always get, like, I guess slightly weirded out by, is that is a game that is clearly full of really incredible creative talent, an amazing set of like thinking about how a world is put together. Genuinely, like, people love that game. No ifs, no buts, no, it's the best one on this platform, but and they did that. Whereas like their previous titles were Killzone.
Yeah.
And like and like Killzone, I like the first one. I'm a massive apologist for the first one. I thought the second one was fine, and the third one was I literally don't know anyone who played it. And then like I think they did some Vita spin-off stuff as well. There was a PS4 game at one point, but it just felt like increasingly kind of creatively bankrupt as a game. Like visually, it was really stunning in places. Some of the visual design of that Killzone series, like especially the enemies, they were really iconic. But then, like, kind of like, whenever I think of Killzone, I think of grey. I think of like just bleak and dust and all that sort of stuff. And then they were like, oh, here we go. Here's the Horizon series, which is massively colourful, really creative piece that they managed to put together. It's such a massive pivot for a company that sometimes I just cannot fathom and cannot get my head around the idea that is the same company.
I know there was a fantastic documentary online which I watched. I know, Sam, you've watched it as well, where they obviously realised, given the ambition of what it was they were hoping to do with Horizon, that they just didn't have people that were experienced with, say, open world RPGs and how that works. So they did take on more staff to kind of, not just because of the scope and scale of the game, but also just in terms of the genres they were kind of working with, really.
Also, it was like, I think what also benefited the game was Horizon, when it came out, was kind of seen as like the best of the best of everything. So it kind of took a lot of open world games that had already existed and just, instead of iterating on, just refined that experience. So Horizon Zero Dawn came out at the time where that Ubisoft approach to open world games was becoming extremely rote and stale already. I think we're maybe up to Far Cry 4 at that point. Definitely, Far Cry 3 was at, the heyday. But this was a time where Ubisoft would release The Crew, which is an open world game where you were a car, and even then you still had radio towers to go up and like gang like villages to siege. It was bonkers. But Horizon and Guerrilla took all that and didn't really change the open world formula, but they refined it and they made it all worthwhile again and made it part of a cohesive world, which is probably what gets me the most excited about Forbidden West, is that obviously since then we've had things like Breath of the Wild, where open world games have once again really evolved and moved forward into basically physics playgrounds, where the player is expected to have complete autonomy and control over everything and be able to go anywhere, and the game is expected to kind of handle that freedom. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, how they manage that, if indeed they do, or they just iterate on Zero Dawn, or it's complete, or it's something new entirely. And also the arrow play, because bows and arrows is the best weapon in all video games.
Correct.
My point was, before we meandered, was that before I do play Horizon Forbidden West, I just finished Deathloop. Only took me 15 hours. It took Dan 50.
I know. And he calls himself a gamer.
Yeah.
You could do it. You did it in 15. He's such a casual, he took 50.
So I was kind of in between games, and I've been playing Yakuza Like a Dragon as kind of like my in-between game.
Oh, nice.
Just like plugging away a couple of hours at it, which is really fun. I really enjoy that game. And I thought, I bet I could pick up something and complete something before Horizon Forbidden West comes out. I bet I can. Because it's not going to be Yakuza Like a Dragon, because...
That's long.
No. There's not enough hours in my day. So I picked up, and this is a bit of a... going off the back of our conversation last time, Pete, is I thought I'm going to be a brave boy and I'm going to play Resident Evil Village.
Oh.
And I'm not going to have my friend next to me while I'm playing it.
Oh, God.
Or online.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this all on my own.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's remarkable. It's so
So
good.
this is okay. Which one is Village? Village is number
8.
It's a tall vampire lady.
Okay,
It's
so this is the tall vampire, right? Okay, so this is not in VR.
No.
The previous one was it?
Well, the previous one was first person.
Okay.
And this one is also in first person. So I don't know why they wouldn't have released it in
that's a bit
VR. I'm
weird,
sure
isn't
they have done.
Yeah, maybe.
But it follows the same characters. It's a continuation of the Ethan Winters saga.
Okay, so I want to know the character that was memed endlessly, the tall vampire lady, or the tall lady. I don't know if she is a vampire, but I seem to remember seeing something.
Well,
about her.
she certainly
Go on.
sucks.
I've just left a really long pause there because I assume that I'll probably get edited out. That lady, she got memed and memed and memed. Is she as pivotal to the story as the memes make her out to be? And is she as interesting a character as all of the focus that has been laid upon her justifies?
I don't know if I were to answer the first question, whether that would be too much of a spoiler
Okay.
About the game, but her presence in the game is certainly not equal to the attention that she got.
Okay, but is she a character that is memorable then? Because I mean, obviously there were the memes going around, and I think we all know why they were memorable to some degree. There was a lot of people who were like, "Oh, my waifu," and all that nonsense. But is there more to her than that? Like, is she actually like a well-developed character? Is she an interesting? I assume you probably get to fight her, or at least interact with her in some way. Are those interactions meaningful, and is her character meaningful, or is she just a 9-foot tall lady that people on the internet fell in love with?
I think she definitely is. Yeah, she's definitely is more than that, because there's a thing about how the game is actually set up, which is quite unique, and I actually really enjoy. So there's the village, which is this collection of like huts and shacks and these like stone buildings, and it almost acts like this hub world. So the aim of the game is you've got to collect these 4 flasks, each one of these 4 sort of heads of the village, of which the Lady Dimitrescu is one of them. And you go to her castle first, and her castle is such a staggering piece of like gaming architecture. It's stunning. I would have happily spent a lot more time than you do in sort of game time just wandering around and exploring just the little nooks and crannies and things that go on there, especially like the lore. And I've never really been interested before in like Resident Evil lore, because mainly it's kind of like, oh, Papa came home from the shop today. He started to cough. Day 2. Oh, his cough's got a little bit worse. Day 3. I saw Papa eating a rat. Oh no. Day 4. Papa's eaten us all. Oh,
Oh no!
Sam, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is it scary? Like, you know, and what I mean by that is, it like, what kind of like, is it just a sense of dread that pervades it throughout, or is it just full of, you know, is it like, you know, the dogs jumping through the window kind of jump scare you got in the earlier games?
I think that the one thing that Village gets really, really right, and the reason why I actually think it's not as scary as 7, is it gets the tone perfectly right of what kind of game this is. There's and this might be quite graphic for some people, there's a moment early on where you're trying to open this gate with your hand. So you close your fist around it and you try to pull down on this gate, and as you're doing it, Lady Dimitrescu pops up from nowhere and like slices your hand off, and so your hand stays gripped to this thing, and like your arm is just there like spurting blood, whatever. And Ethan's like going, oh no, oh no, oh no. And then the next thing you do is press X. Press X. You've got severed hand in your inventory. And the next opportunity you have, Ethan just puts his hand back on his arm and then just douses it in the first aid liquid that you use the rest of the game. And it just starts working again. And from that point on, I was like, yeah, this game knows how insane and like bonkers like this whole world is. And from that point on, I was kind of like, yeah, you know, this game is just a campy, you know, shocky, you know, horror game. And it's kind of like, I feel for me, that's when I enjoy horror the most. Like when I actually know what the rules are, what the boundaries are, and what kind of experience I'm letting myself into. It's like when we watched Invisible Man, Kris, I knew it was going to be like a hypertense thrill about this in this situation. Like I feel like what Village does really well is that it really puts down a marker of, right, this is the world, and like there's a clue here that says look out the window. The minute you look out the window, bam, werewolf. Like it's just like that kind of like late 90s campy Final Destination-esque Scream horror. I think it's really brave, especially for a horror game, to knowingly dilute its horror from time to time and do things that are slightly campy and like very cliched. Yeah,
it sounds a bit like Shadows of the Damned. Is that the game? Shadows of the Damned?
Yeah. That was, you know, very similar in the way that it in how it was dealing with horror. Definitely. In that, like, it was a horrific experience, but knew when to just
go silly,
kind of take you back from really being submerged into a pool of anxiety and unease.
Yeah. There's I think, you know, you mentioned that it's brave to do that in horror, and I completely agree. But I think it also serves a really good other ability, which is that once you lighten the mood, there's somewhere lower to go. There's a lot of horror games that are just unrelentingly bleak and unrelentingly horrifying. And after a while, it gets boring. You get really desensitized to it. Whereas some of the most memorable moments in the Silent Hill series have been moments where there have been moments of like levity. It's almost a 1-2 punch, right? So there's moments where you have that like, oh, phew, I beat the monster or whatever it was, and you sort of you sigh that relief. And then some of the best horror games immediately then ramp up the horror again, right? They're like, oh, you shouldn't have had that moment of feeling safe. Okay, we're going to get you again, right? Like, you know, moments where a really good one, for example, a good example of this is in I think it's Silent Hill 3, where the entire time the framing of the camera, because you don't get to move the camera around all that much in the Silent Hill games, the only ones that exist, the first 4, there's this moment where you're essentially in a horror show in a carnival, and there's a chair sat on a stage, and there is a body slumped in the chair, And the entire time you're looking at it and you're moving past it and you've gone past all these horror things, like really, really awful. Tension's building. And you're in the distance and you move towards this chair with the body in and you just think to yourself, oh no, it's going to get up. And you get closer and closer and you get really, really close. And then nothing happens. And from out of nowhere, a body drops from the ceiling and like a sort of carnival tune plays with like some creepy laughter at the top, like and that moment of levity is like, you got me. It's that moment of like, I saw you totally got me with that, and it's that moment of kind of, as I say, reducing down that anxiety and stress. And I think that then what that means is like, from then on, those next sequence of events can start to ratchet the tension back up and up and up and up and up. Because really all you're looking for when the tension's going, you actually want the release. You want want that like exploding corpse head. You know, you want the like dog to continually jump through the window all of the time. Because what you don't want is that quiet, that foreboding.
I've only sort of recently started to really enjoy horror more than I've ever done, really. You know, if you said to me like 10, 15 years ago that I'd be reading or have read like Stephen King or M.R. James or anything like that, I would have, you know, I would have really like doubted you, or even watched things like The Invisible Man or whatever, because as a genre, I just never really understood it before. Like, I know that Dan is very keen in saying whenever we engage in anything to do with horror, she's like, well, why would you want to scare yourself? And I think I get it, and I guess there is a little bit of a thrill of like experiencing an emotion in a safe space and like knowing what that feels like, and experiencing something knowing that you are going to be safe and knowing that nothing is going to harm you. But part of me thinks that, and this is how I think about horror, is part of me thinks it's not really why would you want to get scared, is why wouldn't you want to feel that relief? Why wouldn't you want to feel that reward of overcoming something and like battling something and really facing up to something that in your mind is a lot more terrifying and scary than you thought?
This is going to sound really up my own butt, but I'm going to say it. That is not what I enjoy about horror games at all. I actually really enjoy horror games as an intellectual pursuit. And
well, there's that as well.
And I think that the reason I see it as an intellectual pursuit is what I really enjoy about the horror games I enjoy is more analysing the games as I'm going through them and understanding what it is that they're doing to evoke such a primitive response. Like, there's that sounds really, really aren't I smart? But it's not. But it's not. I really don't mean it in that way. Like, I kind of see the horrors I've always liked have been things like Eternal Darkness and things like things that are trying to play with your preconceptions and sometimes turn them on their head, sometimes kind of lean into them, but go to the furthest extreme. I guess in some ways it's kind of why I like things like sci-fi, in that it's really taking an idea that is, you would only really be in a hypothetical situation and trying to put it into a place in which for some characters that's their reality, right? So like, I'm always interested, I think it might be why I always read about horror movies, because I don't like watching horror movies, but I think one of the reasons is I love the idea of the movie The Human Centipede. I love the science fiction story. No, it's true, right? It is a genuinely interesting that hypothetical situation that, and obviously I will not go into what that is.
When you said you were going to start up your own butt.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I love the idea.
No, so that's why I say the movie The Human Centipede, not the concept of the human centipede. But the actual the idea of that horror is really terrifying. It's a terrifying idea to try and comprehend, right? Whereas the idea of like somebody gets their throat slashed in a slasher movie, that isn't a terrifying concept to try and understand. We know that there are violent people out there. We know that terrible things happen to good people. But what we can't really comprehend is things like, oh, there's a massive industrial prison complex in which there are experiments that go on that take things and concepts from hell and place human beings into those situations. Or something like, when you watch something like, is it Cube, the one where it's
Cube, Vincenzo Natali, yeah,
right.
Cube.
Like, to me, that's a horror film, but the interesting thing about it is not when there's gore. The interesting thing about it is what an amazing concept for an idea. I think for me that's the interesting thing about horror. It's more about that. I don't like to sit there and be scared. I like to sit there and go, what would Sartre think about this idea?
I've also been watching a series that dropped recently on Netflix that is a genre of horror that I love, which is the found footage.
Sorry, I think one of my favorite stories of my grandparents is around a found footage film. So my grandparents were, pretty strictly religious.
Okay.
Like I never knew them like they'd only listened to classical music. They would, be watching snooker and cricket on TV, watch Countdown. Like, they were very sort of straight down the line.
Wholesome.
I'd never known them to interact with anything, that wasn't in the path of God. Fair enough. Love them to pieces. One day I went round their house and they were just chatting and they went, watched that Blair Witch Project the other day.
Wow.
And I was like, Okay. What did you think? Hey, it was all right, but I don't think they really needed to swear as much as they did. And I thought that was the most sincere and earnest answer to, because obviously you'd put yourself into that situation, and then so obviously my grandparents had spoken about it and gone, well, if we were in that situation, we wouldn't be swearing half as much.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't be effing and jeffing. I'd be saying, oh bother.
Fiddlesticks.
Why are you in the corner, Beryl?
Beryl.
That's actually my grandma's name. So
Shout out.
Great. Shout out.
But I'm not a big fan of. I'm not a really big fan of found footage in terms of like films. Like, I was never really a big fan of Paranormal Activity, say, for example, or The Blair Witch is okay. I enjoyed it at the time when it came out, but I really like it in radio dramas on podcasts where you're scrubbing through audio recordings. There's something about audio that just works really, really well. I really love The White Vault, which I'm on the last series of that at the moment, the 5th season, which is just fantastic. But this series I've watched on Netflix is an adaptation of one of those types of podcasts. It's called Archive 81, which I never listened to the podcast. It was from 2016, from Daniel Powell and Mark Solinger. And it's about a guy who has a job that just looks so cool. Really fiddly, so I don't think I'd be good at it, but cool. A conservator who basically takes like damaged like tapes and restores them. And you see it the way it's filmed. He takes like an old like VHS tape, an old 80s video camera tape, and will kind of painstakingly remove that tape and put it in a new fresh tape. And there's just something really satisfying about watching that and pushing it into the machine and pressing play and watching that play out. And they're really good at their job. And they've been hired to restore a series of tapes, Hi8 videotapes that were destroyed in a fire in the mid-90s. Now, this is a little bit of a leap, I think, but they're so damaged that they cannot move them. So he has to go out to the place which houses them, which is this like small like research campus in the arse end of nowhere that's got, you've guessed it, very little phone signal. But what it does some really interesting things. So that the property he's in, the house he's in, this research campus, it's like the architecture of Control. So that very
the oldest building.
Yeah. like that. So that kind of brutalist kind of design, very dark and nooks and crannies and things. And he basically goes downstairs in this basement and he's restoring the tapes one by one. And the tapes are that of a PhD student called Melody, who in the mid-90s was conducting this ethnographic study of the people who lived in this tower block. And Dan, the conservator, knows that this tower block burnt down. And as you're following the tapes, you're finding out about what happened here through Emily's eyes. And there's something really interesting about that looking. You're watching Dan watch that footage, and occasionally we'll kind of go into and see the world from Melody's point of view, but you're only ever seeing stuff that Dan has got documentation of, which I really, really appreciate. And it reminded me of that great film, I don't know if you ever saw it, Barbarian Sound Studio. You know, and
I was thinking of Cloverfield.
Yeah, Cloverfield as well. That idea, but it's really interesting. It's like watching somebody watch Cloverfield. They've been hired to kind of sift through this documentation, and as you can kind of expect, I suppose. Really, Dan realizes as he's going through these tapes that he has a connection to what's going on, and there's some really weird stuff going on in this apartment block. And there's also some weird stuff happening around where Dan is isolated. So you never ever feel safe. Sometimes you go, oh my gosh, some weird stuff's happening to Dan here. I'm so glad now we're hiding in the video with Melody, and then vice versa. So you're shifting between these two. And it's really interesting. It's not that you're in the safe space with Dan. You never really feel 100% safe.
How does it handle probably one of the trickiest things, I think, that horror can kind of get like lashed up in? And I guess we spoke about this with the M.R. James thing, where it's kind of like when it's dealing with supernatural elements, well, it's dealing with things on the other side. Like, is that quite heavy-handed, or are you not that far away into the series to really know how it's going to start tackling, you know, where these whiffies and jiffies and ghosties and demons are coming from?
It's a really interesting question, because what they've done at the moment is it's really ambiguous. So you're led to believe perhaps that there's something supernaturally, but it's actually never ever, from what I've seen so far, it's not confirmed. Like, it's just weird. And what's driving it is actually the mystery. It's actually what's driving it is that sense of a mystery. That's what interests me. And I think horror works best for me when it is always combined with another genre. So I really love horror mysteries. And what overrides that sense of fear for me is just wanting to know, well, how did this happen? And that's why I love M.R. James stories, because even when it's never ever fully revealed the reason for it, I like still puzzling that out. And this is a mystery. I'm trying to work out, well, what's Dan's connection to this? And what happened to Melody? Because the answers are in these tapes, but of course it takes time for Dan to have to go for each tape one after the other, restore them, and then watch them. I'd recommend watching it. I genuinely would do. It's not something I'm saying you should prioritise above everything else, but actually it's quite a nice welcome addition to my TV watching at the moment.
Listen. All right, let's all listen up.
Hey,
listen up.
I've always said you're the Navi of this podcast. Hey,
I'm always there in in the back of your mind, really annoying you. I have got some serious video game time in over the last few weeks, and I'm really impressed with myself.
Congratulations.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Chris, are you impressed?
Yeah, I'll heap some plaudits your way as well. Yeah, well done.
Nice one, thank you. So,
Well done.
So I've been playing a game that I imported. What?
Oh, no.
So you can just get the PAL version digitally, but you can't get a physical version of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles in Europe.
Pete, can I just ask? Sorry, you just like I know you've gone through this kind of massive movement at the moment to kind of declutter. It's one of your big things. Every time I go and see you, you try and like
foist some
stuff on me to take back with me.
Yes.
But you also have a real kind of penchant for physical copies of games. Can you explain to me? Yeah, like can you explain to me why that is?
Yeah, sure. One, I am an old man. Two, I believe in video game preservation, and I know how often things get dropped from digital stores, and I really want to just own the thing itself. Third, if I don't like the thing, I can get some of my money back.
So I've only ever played one Phoenix Wright game.
Okay, which one did you play?
I played Trials and Tribulations.
That feels like a weird entry to go in on, Sam. Why did you start with game number 2 or number 3 in the series? Like,
so is there a story? Is there a story? I thought it was a case by case. I've never played these games, but I know Pete.
oh, Kris.
Well, no, you wax lyrical about them, Pete. All I know of Phoenix Wright, he's got pointy hair and he's pointing.
I had no history with the Phoenix Wright games. I was living in isolation in Scotland.
Yep.
I was working as a radio reporter for a local radio station.
Glory days.
I played Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Trials and Tribulations on a rainy afternoon whilst I was watching a sheepdog trial.
Live?
Yeah, live. That I had to report on, but couldn't report on it until it finished. And it went on for hours.
Yep.
And
Just the one dog.
just one time. I remember, like, the first time I played this game, having the stark realization that these weren't really games, but they're actually novels.
Correct.
Actual, just books.
Correct.
And that was something I did not realize when I'd entered the world of said Ace Attorney. I thought they were, genuinely interesting, like puzzle-based crime games.
Well,
I thought it'd be a nice, pithy 8-9 hours long. Oh, that was a nice little puzzly, puzzly game.
Yeah.
And then in my sitting in the pouring rain in Scotland watching some sheepdog trials,
Come by.
I remember coming to this realization that these games are a little bit more than that.
Yeah, they are a little bit more than 8 or 9 hour puzzle games. Yeah, so it is a visual novel series, right? But visual novel without the, let's not beat around the bush, smut. So visual novels often, visual novels as a genre are very often lewd games.
Really?
Yeah. So there's a lot of fan service, for example. There's a lot of fan service based visual novel games, and fan service is really code word for, hey, that anime character you really like? What if you could see her pants? Ace Attorney as a series is not about that. Ace Attorney as a series is actually about legal courtroom battles. So each game is a series of court cases, usually about 5 episodes, and those episodes vary in length, but most of the games are about 30 to 40 hours long.
Blimey now, and Sam was expecting it to be
not a light and breezy.
Well, you got your money's worth.
I was like, I've never pressed A so many times on my Nintendo 3DS.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah.
So, skip.
So talk me through, Pete, the visual novel as a genre then, because I've only played a couple of these. So as far as I know, there's not much wiggle room in terms of choice. You're literally, as Sam says, you're kind of, to some degree, and this is not to kind of demean it in some regard, but you're kind of going through the motions, as it were.
Yeah. So there's not a huge amount of player choice in Ace Attorney in the way that you can't really affect the journey of the. You can affect the journey of the story, i.e., I go to this location first, but you're always going to go against the same beats. You're always going to see basically all of the narrative, right? And really, the puzzle is about how do I continue the story forward. What you have, if you imagine a screen and you're looking at the screen, and the bottom third of the screen is taken up with a text box, and you're just reading text, and on at the top of the screen you'll have characters who you're having a conversation with, or maybe you're part of a group discussion. There's 2 or 3 characters on the screen at once. That's kind of the bulk of a visual novel, and that's certainly the case with Ace Attorney. And then the thing that Ace Attorney does is it also has 2 other kinds of gameplay mode. There's kind of an investigation-ish mode where you're going around the crime scene and you're finding evidence and you're putting ideas of what might have happened together. And then there's the courtroom sequences, and that's where you have to, in most of the games, you have to defend your client who, spoilers, is 99% of the time innocent. and you just basically have to make sure that you get a not guilty verdict, and you do that by presenting evidence, questioning witnesses, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a series that was started by Shutakumi, and Shutakumi also did a game that you might remember called Ghost Trick.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right, which is a really beautifully animated DS game with a little dog, and you kind of talk to spirits, and it's really well put together. But Shutakumi's first thing was Ace Attorney. So Shutakumi went away from the series, but then he came back for a game called The Great Ace Attorney Adventures, which is set before absolutely everything. So this is actually, essentially, it's not a reboot, but it's a place where new players can get into the series, because you don't need to know anything about Phoenix Wright. You don't need to know anything about what happened with the Japanese legal system in the series of games, or any of that sort of stuff. You don't need to know how any of that stuff works. Instead, they take it back to, I believe it's the 19th century, like early 19th century, and you are to begin with, you're in Japan, and then you make your a journey to London, and you are in the world of a character called Herlock Sholmes, who is... Yes. So in Japan, it is literally Sherlock Holmes. But over here, obviously, they have slightly different copyright laws over there. Over here, it is Herlock Sholmes. And it is an exploration of that era of London through the eyes of two Japanese travellers, seeing London and seeing how crime and how justice works in London, and defending different clients and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, as I say, it's meant to be like an onboarding experience for new people. And basically, this got collected together recently as part of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, which is a combination of the first game, Great Ace Attorney Adventures, and then the second game, which is the Great Ace Attorney 2 Resolve. Now, I've not played that second one yet, because I finished the first game about a week ago. I have clocked 40 hours to do that first game, and the second game will take roughly that same amount of time as well. And this is, for sure, the best place to get into Ace Attorney as a series. I wouldn't even say go to the first Ace Attorney now. I would say, because there's bits that slightly don't make sense in terms of what it's not quite as clear what it wants you to do, and where it wants you to present evidence, and where it wants you to interrupt testimony and stuff like that. Whereas in this one, it's made expressly clear what you can and cannot do, and you kind of have a pretty good idea of what your choices are how they're going to affect the game, and there's less of the guesswork of, again, that sort of like rubbing different objects against one another to see whether or not you get the right outcome. There's way less of that in this one, whereas the rest of the Ace Attorney games, sometimes that can be a little bit obtuse. In this one, this is the one to jump into. This is the one where I felt so unbelievably smart solving these cases by myself. And some of these cases are, well, the whole point of the series is that they are meant to be, they'll be like locked room murders, right? Nobody was in the room. There's no way in. Someone was murdered. How do you find out who did it? Right?
Now I'm interested.
I genuinely can't believe how fast 40 hours of reading text passed by. Like that is kind of incredible, right? I have a very low threshold.
I was just going to say, like, especially for someone who exclusively reads via audiobook and does not sit down to read.
Oh, yeah. Like, I have a very low threshold for like sitting down and reading physical books. But more than that, I get really bored with stuff, just generally. If something doesn't grab me, I'm just like, nope, done. I don't care. Book, game, music, whatever it is, I'm just not bothered. Like, I'll just move on because life's too short. But 40 hours, 5 cases of reading text, it absolutely blew past. and I'm genuinely surprised at that. It's a really incredible first game in the 2-game collection. I'm just genuinely like,
cool. That's like 5 times
really
pure pool, isn't it? That's crazy. So this isn't a podcast game, Pete.
No, this is an anti-podcast game. You have to read constantly all of the information, how you're going to solve the cases. All of it is told through text to you, and some of the pieces of information are that kind of really interesting investigative stuff whereby a character will just completely offhand mention a random fact about something. Like they'll say, not this, but they'll say something like, and of course, I was leant up against the wall in whichever street it was when I was there, and that street might have nothing to do with the case, except that you find out another piece of information later on down the line that there is a specific shop in that street, and that street does this certain thing, and that does have relevance to the case. But it's just completely like, there'll just be like half a sentence of like, oh, and by the way, this other thing over here, and then move on. And if you haven't kept up with that, if you've not been paying attention, that's the thing where it's like, that's the thing that can really stump you. But if you have been paying attention, God, you really feel smart. You really feel like, oh, they must mean this because of this. It's so good.
I was graced with your presence the other night, Sam.
You were, Kris. And I've not been feeling my best recently.
I think we were all pretty shattered that evening.
We were all pretty shattered. My son's had a bug. I've had a bug. But coming around to yours was an absolute tonic, actually, because I feel like we've stumbled across a real gem of a game.
Oh my word!
And it was kind of like, it's one of those situations where it was a school night, Thursday night. We really shouldn't have been up that late playing board games, but hey, we're wild. Yeah. And I feel like we stumbled across not only a gem of the game, but the perfect game for that. Yeah, for that particular scenario.
Completely agree, because we were all tired, and suddenly I was thinking, oh no, a new game, learning a new game when you're shattered, and as you say, it's a school night. That might be a really, really bad thing to do.
Especially one that's like playtime 60 to 90 minutes, and Actual Lol's got a video out at the moment, which is like the top 10 mistakes when you play board games. It's really fun, and one of them is. Take a look at this number that's on the box that tells you how long it is. Right now, times it by 2 and add 30 minutes for all the people who are actually playing the game.
It's like roasting a chicken.
And then multiply that by 20. Good video. You should go and check it out. So, I was trepidatious as I brought Iki, I-K-I, Iki, to the table for us to play. Because it's quite a large box. There's lots of things going on about it. Some people may call it something or refer to it as something like a chunky Euro or a crunchy Euro game, which essentially means you're going to be making and spending some money and having to do a bit of thinking while you do it. But I think what really stands out about this game is definitely its theme and where it's set. So Iki is a Japanese philosophy, an ancient philosophy, and it refers to the philosophy basically around the best way to live a civil life and live amongst other people. So there's certain like rules and things about displays of wealth and stature and your place in society, and basically learning how to get along with everybody else. And sometimes when a game has that sort of lofty premise of, this is essentially a game about a philosophical sort of way of life, you kind of think, is this just a selling point, or does this actually have something within it? Like, have they just called it Iki because, that's a happy coincidence? Or have they gone, right, we've heard of this thing called Iki. Wouldn't that make a really interesting thing to make a board game about? I was a bit skeptical, but when we started playing it, Iki was such I don't know, Kris, I guess you should describe a bit about what it. First of all, it's absolutely stunning to look at. So this is a sort of reissued, maybe re-implemented version of it from a publisher called Sorry We Are French. It was sent to us by Hachette. Thank you very much. It looks absolutely incredible. There will be an unboxing on our Instagram feed of the game. It's got the most gorgeous print of Mount Fuji on the inside of the box, which is one of the most unnecessary but beautiful things I've seen in a board game box in a long while. And each player essentially takes part in this game of civic life in Japan, this very specific street in Japan. So the board itself represents a street, and there are 4 shops along this street, bisected by a crossroads that goes down the street and across, dividing these 4 shops. So you've got this street, and it's split into 4 areas, and each area has got a place in it which is called a stall, where you'll be putting certain cards and activating certain abilities as you're going along. And essentially the game is you representing, the way I like to think about it was essentially you're representing maybe like a member of the council or like something that's lower than a mayor but higher than a councillor, like, some sort of city official, I guess, who is essentially trying to hire the best people to occupy these stalls, build the best buildings, encourage people to visit certain shops and buy certain items in order to increase your iki value, the sense within you that you're doing the best to civic life. So how the game operates is the first thing that everyone does is essentially choose how much they're going to walk around the street. So in the centre of the board and the street, there's this little rondel, this little basically circular conveyor belt, where you choose how far along this conveyor belt you're going to move. Where you stop determines what kind of shops you're going to visit, what kind of people within this civic life that you're going to then interact with. And they can be cards that you've put down or cards that other people have put down. And then after you've decided how far you're going to move, then everyone moves and interacts and performs certain bonuses awarded by certain cards. When you take the action on a card that is owned by someone else, that member of staff, that person that they've hired, will go up in experience. They'll be slightly better. They'll perform slightly better for the person that actually owns them, that hired them to attend that stall in the first place. And then after all that business is done, and we've done a little bit of points counting, the month is over and we pass on to the other month. And Iki is a game that takes place over a course of a whole year. So essentially you play 13 rounds. So there's 12 months and there's Japanese New Year. And there's the coming of the seasons. There's different cards that come up throughout spring, summer, autumn and winter. There are different items on sale for each of the seasons. So different fish are present during winter than there are during summer. Fires come and threaten your stalls, so you have to think about how you're going to start preventing these fires and attacking your properties. And it was the most gentle, non-combative, cooperative almost experience that I've had in a long time in a board game, where it really felt like we were building this wonderful little street in Japan.
And I think what makes it so gentle and wonderful is that as Sam says, it takes place entirely in this small street. Now, when you think often of it's a worker movement game. When you think of these types of games, you think of a map or a kind of a large space that you're moving people back and forth. I'm building a civilization here or some kind of settlement. I'm developing it further. Whereas this, no, we're just pootling around. And it felt like we were just window shopping in certain places. I'll stop here. And the only time it ever really felt like it was a little bit combative was that typical kind of worker placement thing where you elect at the beginning as to how far you're going to move around the street. But even then, if Sam has gone on 4 and I go, oh, I wanted to move 4, well, I can put it on 3 because I've got a sandal here I can spend to move 1 space further. Or I could put it on the 1 to 4 space, which means I don't get a certain bonus that everyone else will get, but I can choose how far I want to go based on where other people go, because, you know, Sam may get to the fishmonger before me and get that last fish that I wanted, but now I don't have to worry because I've got on that 1 to 4 bit. So there's no analysis paralysis really, because you're kind of talking to each other constantly about what you could do, because you don't really feel threatened by each other, because if anything, somebody could land on your space, use that special power you've bought, and oh yeah, you get something, I get something as well. This is great. And I was thinking, how did they design this? It very rarely happens in a board game where you can kind of see the seams, you reverse engineer it and go, okay, I got to how they got to this. This is one of those games where I think, how did they fine tune all these different elements here? And I went round to my neighbours today to pick up some fruit and veg, because our other neighbour is a fruit and delivery man, and a client cancelled, and he had this massive crate, and basically everyone in the neighbourhood is getting like bits of this fruit, and honestly it's so much stuff, but he was like, I just can't stop thinking about Icky. I just can't stop thinking about it. He's genuinely considering, Sam, buying it.
I think for me, one of the things that I really, really, really enjoyed about it is that Great Western Trail is one of my favourite games, and one of the reasons I love it is that sense of building towards something, of creating a basically an economy in which to improve your worth as the game goes on. So you start off making very small gains, but invest them to make bigger and bigger and bigger gains. Where I think this gentleness from Iki comes from, where I think that it really didn't feel that combative and it really felt convivial, is that the actual street itself is in a constant state of flux and change and movement, and it has this wonderful sense of growth, death and rebirth almost, which I found, this is going to sound really hyperbolic, but I found generally quite beautiful and touching, because like not only are you moving through the seasons, and not only are you kind of have this sense of this street sort of passing through time, but if you boost the experience up of these characters enough, they retire and they're suddenly not on the street anymore. And you sometimes don't have control of when that happens to your characters or to others. You could literally walk along a street and retire all your opponent's characters and send them off to pastures new. So that when it comes around to their turn, their characters aren't there anymore because they've been retired.
Yeah, because there was a moment where Matt said, "Oh, what happened to that person there? They helped me with my fireproofing," and you were like, "Oh no, they've retired."
And it's not like a bad thing. They go back into your board, and then after every 3 months, basically you get payday. And if they're retired, you get a better payday, and you don't have to feed them rice. And it's but because the board always feels like it's in the state of flux and it's never stayed, you never really feel the pressure to grow and like become like a capitalist overlord. You never really feel the pressure from any other player that like, oh my god, they've got all these people in these key points in the board, I need to try and move them. No, they'll go. At some point, all these people will move on and new people will come in, and you'll have another chance to try and perform certain things and establish certain areas around the board. All this will change, and I really love that central philosophy of this board, that all this will change. Nothing here is permanent, and we're just here to have a good time. And and again, it's that weird sense of philosophy, like in this civil life that we're enjoying for this brief like hour and a half, where we're just all together. Like, how do you foster that feeling of just being nice and civil and civic to each other? Well, it's kind of like with this game, and it's really unusual to have a game that kind of felt so pleasing and so warming to play. So that was Staying In with myself, Sam Turner. There was Kris Darby, and there was also Peter Willington. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. We spoke about a great many things. There's Archive 81, which is available on Netflix, The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, which is available on PlayStation, Steam, and the Nintendo Switch. And I think Kris and I are very interested in maybe getting that one. Iki as well, which was kindly sent to us by Hachette. You can get that at all good gaming stores, local or otherwise. And we also talked about other great things like Resident Evil Village, which is, it's so good, and lots of different horror titles to boot as well. Been on a strange sort of horror vibe recently. Maybe it's just because it's, the darker months. Anyway, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you having around. There's tons of ways to interact and, get to know us better in between episodes of the podcast. You can go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Staying In Pod. The Instagram page especially has tons of unboxings, pictures of us out and about, stuff we're doing. Sometimes we run the odd competition. So really, that's the best way to get in touch. You can also send us an email if you want to send us something a little bit stronger or longer, stayinginpod@gmail.com. And all the information, if you might have missed me blathering on, is available at stayinginpodcast.com as well. Follow us, subscribe, like, do whatever you feel you need to, and we'll love you even more for it than we already do. Anyway, until next time, please do take care of yourselves. We're going to be at AirCon in March, so if you'd like to see us, maybe pick up a sticker. We'll be hanging around there, hopefully, fingers crossed. So maybe we'll see you soon. But until then, until next time, bye-bye.